The Criterion Collection is a film distribution company, mostly Blu-rays and disc. They've even just finally got up to 4K as of this coming November. Their gimmick and their ideology is to preserve and showcase the best of the best. Movies you need to see in your lifetime. The last time I covered the collection, I talked about a medium I feel is underappreciated. Funnily enough, there's actually another type of film I feel Criterion doesn't represent as well as they should. And this time it's not a medium, it's an actual genre. Horror. And what better time to showcase the few horror classics they have than the beginning of the Halloween month itself. Let's start our journey with a film that feels right at home in the collection, despite the fact it's a little at odds with that philosophy I mentioned. They prefer to have films you can't get anywhere else. They have also released that one film you always see in those big, cheap compilation sets of the 100 great horror movies.
By now there were no more screams. I realized that I was alone with 50 or 60 of those things, just standing there. They didn't move, they didn't run, or just stood there staring at me.
Of course, it's the film that changed horror film forever. Before Living Dead, horror was pretty much nothing but campy films set in castles, and those castles were pretty much owned by Vincent Price 80% of the time. It helped that he was usually the only good actor in those films too. Really slow, plotting films that were actually marketed most of the teenagers. That way they could make out in their seats without actually missing anything. Then along comes George Romero, who really wanted the horror that books had and films hadn't. The kind of horror that gets under your skin, makes you genuinely afraid and terrified. The kind of horror that honestly, I like the campy stuff too, but it's the horror that I look for. Night of the Living Dead is still a good movie. The effects are really solid. The pacing feels just right for that slow burn. But I didn't find the zombies as scary as the radio.
All persons who die during this crisis, from whatever cause, will come back to life to seek human victims.
I'm telling you, they can't get in here.
You never find out how this outbreak happened. You just get hints at the greater world at large. The things that you are not seeing on films, and that the characters can only fathom what's happening based on very limited information. You have to think about what you're hearing, visualize it for yourself. There's nothing scarier than that. But I don't love Night of the Living Dead. I kinda just really appreciate it, and enjoy it just fine. The film may be outshined by plenty of horror since, but even today, I see why it started so many trends that do still work, especially within the film itself.
Johnny!
You're still afraid.
Stop it now, I mean it.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Let's go back to that medium I covered in the last installment. Criterion does have an official statement on why it rarely picks animation. According to them, animated films get really good distribution already, so they don't really feel the need. I understand where they're coming from, but I don't entirely agree with that sentiment. There's plenty of animated classics with little distribution, such as, say, a DVD that's out of print and that was it, not even so much as digital releases. But hey, it's a statement. From what I understand, horror wasn't as lucky to get a statement on why it doesn't happen all that much. I love the collection, but I'm gonna just take a leap of faith here and guess that maybe the collection has the same stigma that Hollywood has. Now, to be fair, with companies like Shout Factory, horror films do get some pretty good releases, so maybe that's it too. But until I hear, I'm gonna guess it's the stigma. I mean, after all, the next film I'm gonna talk about, Hollywood doesn't consider a horror film. They consider it a drama, a detective drama. After all, how could a horror film win Best Picture?
Oh, Agent Starling, you think you can dissect me with this blunt little tool?
No. I thought that your knowledge...
You're so ambitious, aren't you? Do you know what you look like to me with your good bag and your cheap shoes? You look like a rube. And that accent you've tried so desperately to shed, pure West Virginia. What does your father do? Is he a coal miner? Does he stink of the land?
There's no possible way. Scary horror icon Silence of the Lambs is a horror film. Hannibal Lecter alone is one of the horror villains. One of those ones everyone has heard of. Even people who haven't seen the film could tell you what he looks like. And that's forgetting Buffalo Bill, which is a shame, because there's some good three-dimensional building for the character. Silence of the Lambs is a near-perfect movie. The creepy imagery and the pacing makes your spine tingle. FBI agent Clarice is every bit of the great character we need. She's not at all a weakling, but she's completely far from fearless. When she's afraid, we're afraid. That's a good balance to walk for this type of film. Even the first time I saw it, I was completely blown away. And when I bought it on a Criterion sale, I was blown away exactly the same yet again.
It rubs the lotion on its skin. It does this whenever it's told.
Mister, my family will pay cash. Whatever ransom you're asking for, they'll pay it.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
Now, speaking of detective dramas, there is kind of no way to better showcase how little horror the collection has than to just admit I couldn't even come up with 4. I ended up being stuck with 2 other detective films. Ones that, well, makes sense that I thought of them when I thought of Silence, as I bought those 2 in the same sale as I bought Silence of the Lambs. They were both about grisly crimes, and they were both foreign films from 2 other countries. Figured it was a good idea, you know? Let's see how 3 countries deal with a somewhat similar sounding story on paper. The one I didn't pick was M, and if you haven't seen M, that's one of those greatest films of all time kind of deals, so go check that out too. The one I picked instead was a film that I have needed to tell people about for the reasons I really like it, just as much as the reasons I have some strong issues with it. It's a film I think I might be the first on YouTube, or even on Vimeo, to ever mention. A film that for a while my dumb American brain thought was pronounced humanite. But if this is one of those times where Google Translate gets it correct, then let me present to you Bruno Dumas' Humanity.
C'est Domino. C'est effroyable. Ce matin, on a découvert le cadavre d'une petite, violée, couverte de sang. C'était vraiment horrible.
The film is about a French detective, Detective Pharaon. Humanity is one of those slow art films that you may have heard about. The majority of the film is basically just Pharaon's life. You may have figured out from the title that the film's about humanity. Day-to-day life and all of its lack of glory. Little tiny bits that maybe you appreciate, maybe you don't think much about. And of course, the moral standing. The murder is so bad that it's kind of ruined the town's spirit, and people are a lot more kind of depressed and dissociative. I mean, if you've ever been in a small town, you probably know that feeling. And it's bits like that that I really did like about the movie. I love having to think this over for myself. Not every movie needs to do that, absolutely. But I also think the film's kind of tacky and kind of shameless. The opening shot of the film is the corpse. And, good thing I bought the movie and felt obligated to keep going. Or else I wouldn't have found out I do in fact quite like the movie. Because I wouldn't blame anybody for turning it off then. I really wouldn't. Let's also talk about how there's some content which is unsimulated, if you catch my drift. It felt real and it felt awkward enough that I'm pretty sure there was no movie magic. Which makes the scenes tougher to watch, actually, since they're so rough and awkward. I get what they were going for, though. I'm not even going to say that they're a bad thing to have done for the movie. It's just, yeah, not everyone's going to really want to tune into those parts. So no, it's not a horror film at all. There's no stretching to convince it is one. It's just a film that I bought when I also bought a horror film.
Tu vois, Pharaon, comme la vie est écœurante.
Alright, you did click on the video for the promise of horror films. Especially since the thumbnail kind of gives all of them away if you know the collection's covers. And just like my animation video, you could make the argument I saved my favorite of them all for last. Let's bookmark this video with the other film you could only call horror, with the other film shot in black and white. And funnily enough, the other film whose first three words in the title are Night of the.
Well, now what's to be, Lord? Another widow? How many's it been? 6? 12? I just remember.
Night of the Hunter is one of those stories. The ones film buffs have heard before. A movie that failed at the box office and critically because the critics refused to understand it. I think horror buffs have heard this story before too. This is one of the most beautifully shot films ever made. When the scenes are still, I swear this thing is like a Renaissance painting. And when it starts to move, you cannot believe what you're looking at. It's cold. It's chilling. You get that feeling down your spine from start to end. Despite the early critical reception, it's been pretty instantly regarded now as one of the greatest films ever made. But if the amount of greatest films ever made being in the collection has started to make you wonder which ones you should pick out, I gotta suggest Night of the Hunter like nobody's business. Well, you've made it to the end of the video. Thanks for watching to the end. And since you did, maybe you liked it. So if you did, go hit that like button down there. Hey, sincerely, thanks for watching. These are the people who are currently supporting me every month to keep this train going.